There was a time when making a sandwich wasn't about artisanal breads or Instagram-worthy presentations. It was about survival, creativity, and making the most of what you had in the pantry. The 1970s were a different era entirely, when British households approached lunch with a kind of fearless experimentation that would make today's food bloggers weep. If you think you know strange sandwich combinations, think again. Hit that subscribe button, give this a like, and let me know in the comments which of these shocks you the most. Banana and mayonnaise. Let's start with something that sounds absolutely mental by today's standards. The banana and mayonnaise sandwich was a genuine 1970s staple, particularly popular with children whose mothers had run out of proper sandwich fillings. The combination sounds horrific, but there was something about the creamy sweetness of mashed banana mixed with the tangy richness of mayonnaise that worked. It was cheap, filling, and surprisingly satisfying. Many remember eating these whilst watching Blue Peter or Magpie, the sweet and savory flavors somehow making perfect sense in that innocent pre-health conscious era. The texture was admittedly quite something, but for thousands of British kids, this was comfort food at its finest. Crisp sandwich with butter. Before it became a meme, the crisp sandwich was deadly serious business. We're talking about proper thick-cut white bread, slathered with real butter, and filled with nothing but a generous handful of crisps. Ready salted was the classic choice, though salt and vinegar devotees would argue their case fiercely. The art was in getting the ratio right, enough crisps for that satisfying crunch, but not so many that they'd pierce through the bread. This wasn't considered weird or lazy, it was simply lunch. The combination of carbs, salt, and fat hit every pleasure center, and the sound of that first bite was genuinely thrilling. Mothers would pack these for school trips without a second thought. Condensed milk and white bread. This one will make your teeth ache just thinking about it. Straight condensed milk from the tin, spread thick as butter on white bread, was considered a perfectly acceptable sandwich filling. The sweetness was almost overwhelming, sticky and cloying, but children absolutely loved it. It was the kind of treat you'd get when your mum was feeling particularly generous, or when she'd genuinely run out of everything else. The bread would go slightly soggy from the milk, creating this strange, sweet, doughy texture that somehow worked. Looking back, it was essentially cake filling on bread, but in the 1970s, if it filled you up and made you happy, it was a proper sandwich. Many remember sneaking spoonfuls of condensed milk whilst making these forbidden treats. Pickled onion and cheese. The pickled onion and cheese sandwich was a pub favorite that somehow made its way into packed lunches across Britain. We're talking about those sharp, vinegary cocktail onions paired with strong cheddar, creating a combination that would knock you sideways. The onions were usually sliced to distribute the intense flavor, though brave souls would include them whole. This sandwich required commitment, you knew you'd taste it for hours afterwards, but the savory intensity was genuinely addictive. It was particularly popular with working men who wanted something that would cut through the grease of a morning fry-up. The combination of sharp cheese and acidic onions created this mouth-puckering experience that somehow became deeply satisfying. Jam and cheese. Sweet meets savory in the most British way possible. Strawberry jam and mature cheddar was the classic combination, though raspberry jam had its devoted followers. The contrast was extraordinary, the fruity sweetness playing against the sharp, salty cheese in ways that shouldn't have worked but absolutely did. This wasn't considered experimental or weird, it was simply another sandwich option, often appearing at children's tea parties alongside more conventional fare. The key was using proper jam, not the artificial stuff, and cheese that had some bite to it. Many remember their grandmothers making these without batting an eyelid, treating them as perfectly normal sustenance. The flavor combination was like a primitive version of cheese and chutney, but with that distinctly homemade, make-do-and-mend quality. Marmite and cucumber. Before Marmite became the poster child for divisive foods, it was simply another store cupboard staple. The Marmite and cucumber sandwich represented British restraint at its finest, the intense, salty yeast extract balanced by cool, crisp cucumber slices. The contrast in textures was as important as the flavors, the soft bread and smooth Marmite offset by that refreshing crunch. This was considered a particularly grown-up sandwich, the kind of thing you'd graduate to when you'd outgrown jam and butter. The cucumber provided a cooling effect against Marmite's intensity, creating something surprisingly sophisticated. Many remember these being particularly popular during summer months, when the cucumber added a refreshing element to packed lunches. It was simple, effective, and utterly British. Sugar sandwiches. The sugar sandwich sounds like pure madness now, but in the 1970s, it was a legitimate treat for children who'd been particularly good. White bread, butter, and a generous sprinkling of granulated sugar created something that was essentially dessert masquerading as lunch. The sugar would crunch between your teeth, creating this textural contrast that was genuinely exciting for young palates. It was the kind of thing mothers would make as a special treat, not an everyday occurrence, but common enough that most children of the era remember them fondly. The combination of carbs and pure sugar provided an instant energy boost that would send kids bouncing off the walls. Looking back, it was probably the most honest sandwich ever created, no pretense about nutrition, just pure, unadulterated pleasure. Dripping and salt. Before anyone knew what cholesterol was, the dripping sandwich ruled supreme. This was rendered fat from the Sunday roast, cooled until it set like butter, then spread thick on bread with a generous pinch of salt. The flavor was intensely savory, rich, and meaty in a way that modern spreads simply cannot match. This wasn't poverty food, this was considered a proper treat, the concentrated essence of roast beef or lamb in sandwich form. The texture was unusual, slightly granular from the salt crystals, but incredibly satisfying. Working men would take these for their lunch, knowing they'd provide sustained energy for physical labor. The taste was so distinctive that one bite would transport you straight back to Sunday dinners and proper home cooking. It was Britain on bread. Tinned salmon and cucumber. The tinned salmon and cucumber sandwich represented British sophistication in the 1970s. This wasn't the expensive fresh salmon we know today, but the tin variety that came in those distinctive red tins. Mixed with mayonnaise and paired with thin cucumber slices, it was considered quite posh. The salmon had a particular texture, slightly mushy but flavorful, and the cucumber provided that essential British crunch. These sandwiches often appeared at afternoon teas or special occasions, served on white bread with crusts removed. The combination was refreshing and substantial, the fish providing protein whilst the cucumber kept things light. Many remember these being served at christenings, small gatherings, or when the vicar came round for tea. It was aspirational eating, a step up from everyday fare. Bloater paste and lettuce. Bloater paste was one of those mysterious spreads that filled British pantries, made from salted herrings and possessing a flavor that was intensely fishy and utterly distinctive. Spread on buttered bread and topped with crisp lettuce, it created a sandwich that was undeniably British. The paste had a strong, salty taste that modern palates might find overwhelming, but paired with fresh lettuce, it became something approaching sophisticated. This was grown-up food, not something you'd give to children, but adults appreciated its robust flavor. The contrast between the intense, savory paste and the mild, crisp lettuce created a balance that worked surprisingly well. These sandwiches were particularly popular with older generations who remembered rationing and appreciated strong flavors that didn't need much to make an impact. Beetroot and egg. The beetroot and egg sandwich was a masterclass in British practicality. Hard-boiled eggs were sliced and paired with pickled beetroot, creating this vivid purple and yellow combination that looked as striking as it tasted. The beetroot would inevitably stain everything it touched, turning bread pink and fingers purple, but nobody seemed to mind. The earthy sweetness of beetroot played beautifully against the rich, creamy egg, whilst the vinegar from the pickling process added a sharp note that cut through the richness. These sandwiches were particularly popular in packed lunches, despite the inevitable mess they created. The flavor combination was both satisfying and refreshing, protein-rich and filling. Many remember eating these whilst trying desperately not to stain school uniforms, but failing spectacularly every time. Spam and pickle. Spam and pickle represented post-war Britain's relationship with convenience food at its most honest. The processed meat, sliced thick and paired with sharp pickle, created a sandwich that was both substantial and flavorful. Spam had this distinctive texture, soft but with a slight firmness that held up well in sandwiches. The pickle, usually Branston or similar, provided acidic contrast that cut through the meat saltiness. This wasn't considered poor quality food, it was simply another protein option, often packed for long journeys or outdoor activities. The combination was reliable, filling, and required no refrigeration, making it perfect for British picnics. Many remember these sandwiches being staples of family outings, providing sustenance for walks in the countryside or trips to the seaside. Lemon curd and butter. The lemon curd sandwich occupied that strange British territory between sweet and savory, breakfast and pudding. Proper homemade lemon curd, thick and intensely citrusy, spread on buttered bread created something that was essentially dessert but somehow acceptable for lunch. The butter was crucial, providing richness that balanced the curd sharpness, whilst the bread offered neutral territory for these strong flavors to play out. These were often served to children as treats, the sweet tart flavor being particularly appealing to young palates. The texture was smooth and creamy, completely different from jam but equally satisfying. Many remember grandmothers making these with leftover lemon curd from Sunday puddings, transforming what should have been a sweet into an acceptable sandwich filling through the magic of British practicality. Cold roast potato and salt. The cold roast potato sandwich might sound bizarre, but it made perfect sense in households where nothing was ever wasted. Leftover roast potatoes from Sunday dinner, cooled overnight and sliced thick, were transformed into surprisingly satisfying sandwiches. The potatoes retained their crispy edges but had a fluffy interior, creating interesting textural contrasts. A generous sprinkle of salt enhanced their natural earthiness, whilst butter provided richness. These weren't everyday sandwiches but appeared regularly in families who believed in using every scrap of food. The flavor was comforting and familiar, tasting like Sunday dinners and family gatherings. The carbohydrate hit was substantial, making them surprisingly filling. Many remember eating these whilst wondering why something so simple tasted so satisfying, the familiar flavors evoking memories of proper home cooking. Sardines and tomato. The sardine and tomato sandwich was Britain's answer to sophisticated eating, despite being made from tinned fish and whatever tomatoes were available. The sardines, usually mashed with a fork and seasoned generously, provided intense flavor that paired surprisingly well with fresh tomato slices. The fish was oily and rich, whilst the tomatoes added freshness and acidity that cut through the intensity. This combination was considered quite grown up, not something children would automatically appreciate, but adults found it satisfying and nutritious. The mess factor was considerable, sardine oil and tomato juice combining to create something that required careful eating. These sandwiches were particularly popular during summer months when tomatoes were at their best, the seasonal element adding to their appeal. Many remember these being served at informal lunches, adult food that marked a step away from childhood favorites. Golden syrup and bread. The golden syrup sandwich was sugar delivery in its purest form, treacle spread thick on buttered bread creating something that was part breakfast, part dessert. The syrup would soak into the bread, creating this sweet, sticky texture that was incredibly satisfying. This wasn't an everyday occurrence but appeared regularly as a treat, particularly for children who'd been especially good. The flavor was intensely sweet but with that distinctive treacle note that made it somehow more sophisticated than plain sugar. The stickiness was part of the appeal, requiring careful eating but providing immense satisfaction. These sandwiches were often served with cups of tea, the bitter drink providing balance against the intense sweetness. Many remember the ritual of making them carefully, ensuring even distribution whilst trying not to waste a single drop of the precious syrup. Cold sausage and mustard. The cold sausage and mustard sandwich represented British breakfast culture extending into lunchtime. Leftover sausages from breakfast, cooled and sliced lengthwise, were paired with generous amounts of English mustard to create something that was both familiar and exciting. The mustard provided heat that complemented the rich, fatty sausage, whilst the bread absorbed the flavors beautifully. This wasn't considered unusual or makeshift, it was simply efficient use of ingredients. The sausages retained their flavor even when cold, the herbs and spices coming through clearly. These sandwiches were particularly popular with working men who needed substantial food that would keep them going. The combination was protein-rich and satisfying, whilst the mustard added enough kick to keep things interesting. Many remember these appearing in packed lunches, providing a taste of home comfort away from the house. Cheese and onion crisp butt thai. Before the crisp sandwich became a cultural phenomenon, the cheese and onion crisp butt thai was already a beloved institution. This wasn't just any crisps, it had to be proper cheese and onion flavor, preferably Golden Wonder or Walker's. The artificial cheese powder combined with onion flavoring created a taste that was somehow more intensely cheesy than actual cheese. Paired with thick butter and crushed between slices of white bread, it created a sandwich that was pure comfort food. The crunch was essential, providing textural contrast against the soft bread and smooth butter. These were often packed for school trips or eaten as after-school snacks, the familiar flavors providing instant satisfaction. The mess was considerable, orange powder staining fingers and faces, but nobody cared because the taste was so satisfying. Fish paste and cucumber. Fish paste was one of those mysterious British staples that appeared in small jars and provided intense flavor for very little money. Usually made from salmon or anchovy, the paste was salty, fishy, and incredibly potent. Spread thinly on buttered bread and topped with cucumber slices, it created a sandwich that was surprisingly sophisticated. The cucumber was essential, providing cooling contrast against the intense fish flavor whilst adding that crucial British crunch. These sandwiches were particularly popular with older generations who appreciated strong flavors and remembered when fish paste was considered a luxury. The combination worked because each element balanced the others, the mild cucumber tempering the intense paste whilst the butter provided richness. Many remember these being served at genteel afternoon teas, small triangular sandwiches that packed a flavorful punch. Peanut butter and jam. Long before it became an American import, the peanut butter and jam sandwich was quietly establishing itself in British households. The peanut butter available was usually the basic variety, less sweet than modern American versions but with a distinctive nutty flavor. Paired with strawberry or raspberry jam, it created a combination that was both familiar and exotic. The textures worked beautifully together, the smooth peanut butter contrasting with the fruity jam, whilst both complemented the soft bread. This wasn't considered particularly unusual, just another sweet sandwich option for children's lunches. The protein from the nuts made it more substantial than plain jam sandwiches, providing longer-lasting energy. Many remember these being particularly popular during school holidays, easy to make and satisfying to eat, though the sticky factor required careful handling. Cold gravy and bread. The cold gravy sandwich sounds absolutely horrific by modern standards, but in households where every scrap was precious, it made perfect sense. Leftover gravy from Sunday roast, cooled until it set like savory jelly, was spread on bread to create something that captured the essence of proper home cooking. The gravy retained all its meaty flavors, the herbs and seasoning coming through clearly even when cold. This wasn't poverty food, it was efficient cooking, making sure nothing good went to waste. The texture was unusual, slightly gelatinous but surprisingly pleasant, whilst the flavor was intensely savory. These sandwiches were often eaten by children who couldn't wait for proper meals, grabbing quick sustenance between playing outside. The taste was comforting and familiar, evoking memories of proper Sunday dinners and family gatherings around laden tables. Processed cheese and pickle. The processed cheese and pickle sandwich represented modern convenience meeting traditional British flavors. The cheese, usually bright orange and perfectly square, had this distinctive artificial taste that somehow worked beautifully with sharp pickle. This wasn't considered inferior to proper cheese, it was simply different, with its own unique texture and flavor profile. The pickle provided acidic contrast that cut through the cheese's richness, whilst both complemented the soft bread perfectly. These sandwiches were incredibly popular in packed lunches, the processed cheese not requiring refrigeration and maintaining its flavor even after hours in school bags. The combination was reliable, tasty, and required no special preparation. Many remember these being staples of family picnics, providing familiar comfort food that everyone could enjoy without complaint. Bovril and butter. The Bovril sandwich was concentrated British comfort in edible form. This thick, dark spread made from beef extract provided intense, meaty flavor that was unlike anything else. Spread thinly on buttered bread, it created a sandwich that was both simple and deeply satisfying. The flavor was so potent that a little went a very long way, the salty, savory taste being almost overwhelming in its intensity. This wasn't children's food, it was grown-up sustenance that required appreciation for strong flavors. The combination with butter was essential, providing richness that balanced Bovril's intensity whilst the bread offered neutral territory for these powerful flavors. These sandwiches were particularly popular during cold weather, providing warming comfort that seemed to heat you from the inside out. Many remember them being served with cups of hot tea, creating a combination that epitomized British comfort food. Tinned peach and cream cheese. The tinned peach and cream cheese sandwich represented British attempts at sophistication using available ingredients. The peaches, usually the halves in syrup, were drained and sliced to pair with soft cream cheese on white bread. The combination was surprisingly sophisticated, the sweet fruit playing against the mild, creamy cheese whilst the bread absorbed the flavors beautifully. This wasn't everyday food but appeared at special occasions or when mothers wanted to create something a bit different. The texture contrast was important, the soft peaches and smooth cheese creating interesting mouthfeel against the bread. The sweetness was balanced, not as intense as pure fruit but more interesting than plain cheese. These sandwiches were often served at children's parties or afternoon teas, looking elegant whilst being simple to prepare. Many remember them as treats that marked special occasions, ordinary ingredients transformed into something approaching sophisticated. Malt extract and bread. The malt extract sandwich was Britain's answer to health food, long before anyone understood what that actually meant. This thick, dark syrup made from malted barley was considered incredibly nutritious and was often given to children as a tonic. Spread on bread, usually with butter, it created a sandwich that was intensely sweet but with a distinctive, almost medicinal flavor. The texture was sticky and required careful eating, but the taste was genuinely appealing to those who developed a fondness for it. This wasn't exactly food, it was more like medicine that happened to be edible, but many children grew to love its unique flavor. The sweetness was different from sugar or jam, earthier and more complex, whilst the supposed health benefits made parents feel virtuous about serving it. Many remember these being presented as treats that were somehow good for you, making the sweetness acceptable even to health-conscious mothers. These sandwiches weren't just food, they were cultural artifacts. Each one tells a story about British ingenuity, making do with what was available, and finding pleasure in the simplest combinations. They might shock modern palates, but they nourished generations and created memories that last lifetimes. If any of these brought back forgotten lunchtime memories, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. Which one shocked you the most?